This is a very important topic. This is a very important video. So you've been learning how a trust is structured, the roles, the documents, the rules, but there are two instruments inside the trust indenture that most grantors never get trained on. They decide who gets paid, who leads, and who inherits. They're called trust capital units and units of beneficial interest. The trust indenture is the governing document of your private express trust, 25 to 35 pages minimum. It defines the structure, the intent, the rules, and every major decision the trust will ever make. One of the most critical sections in that trust indenture sets the number of trust capital units. TCUs are the equity layer of your trust, not ownership of the asset. They represent a share in the productive output of the trust. When the trust generates profits, TCU holders receive distributions proportional to their units. TCUs are how the grantor establishes the future power of their descendants. They create real incentives for participation. They formalize who has a stake in the trust's long-term performance. Here's how they're sized. For larger trusts, the total TCU count starts at about 500 and can go up to 5,000. For asset holding trusts built primarily to hold and protect property, the starting number is typically about 100 to 200. The number of initial beneficiaries matters too, though. More beneficiaries means more TCUs are needed to keep distributions meaningful. Now, here's where this gets serious. When you study fraudulent trust court cases, the TCU section appears in the findings more than any other because the language around them is roughly left vague in poorly drafted indentures. And when the language is vague, a judge fills in the blanks. The grantor's intent gets interpreted by someone with no relationship to the family and no stake in its outcome. Precise TCU language is what prevents that. The tool that makes TCU governs predictable is what I call a TCU flow table. Think of it as an if this, then that map. For every scenario the grantor can anticipate, death, transfer disqualification, charitable remainder, the table assigns a clear outcome. The board of trustees execute, they don't interpret. That's the difference between a trust that runs the way you built it and one that becomes a legal dispute. UBIs represent something different. They identify who has a recognized beneficial interest in the trust assets and distribution. TCU holders share in the profits. UBI holders are the recognized beneficiaries, the people the trust is fundamentally built to serve. These two categories can overlap often, and they do, but they serve distinct structural purposes inside the indenture. Here's a sizing principle. While TCUs can be set at virtually any number, UBIs become difficult to manage beyond 100. That ceiling is not arbitrary. A trust designed to serve a large extended family across multiple generations could have dozens of potential beneficiaries. It still needs to stay at or under 100 UBIs to remain administratively functional. Push past that and you get distribution disputes, administrative delays, and the kind of complexity that compromises the trust operations. So the rule is clear. No more than 100 units of beneficial interest, and don't divide them. Fractional UBRs are where things break completely down. The indenture should transfer whole units only. There's a deeper point here too. The indenture is written today for a future you can't fully understand or see. The grantors whose trusts hold up across generations are the ones who built it in simplicity on the governance side. They made real decisions about who was recognized as a beneficiary rather than leaving the list open-ended. That's what a trust built to last actually looks like. There's a free What is a Trust ebook linked in the description, so go grab it and let's keep building. Let's bring both instruments together and look at how they actually function inside live trust governance. The indenture sets the total TCU count. From that total, units are allocated to direct descendants, legal heirs, key participants based on the grantor's documented intent, not like to my children, to specific individuals with specific unit counts in the indenture and tracked in a separate TCU register. That register is a living document. Every issuance, every transfer, every certificate change is recorded in it. The board of trustees maintains it. When a certificate needs to be reissued because a holder dies, transfer units, or becomes disqualified, the board acts according to the flow rules of the grantor. They don't have to decide, they execute. Now consider what happens without that clarity. A legal heir dies and leaves no transfer instructions. A non-legal heir who received units later passes away. All the direct descendants decline or are disqualified. What then? A well-drafted TCU flow maps every one of those scenarios. Each outcome is prioritized and documented. No ambiguity, no room for the court to step in and decide what the grantor would have wanted. The flow also reflects the grantor's values beyond the immediate family. Many indentures include a charitable remainder, a percentage of TCUs that flows into designated organizations if the family succession chain is exhausted. This isn't just generosity, it's a final layer of governance that keeps assets protected and purposeful, even in the worst case scenarios. There's one more distinction worth understanding. When a trustee or officer holds stewardship TCUs, units tied to their role rather than purchased or exchanged, those units return to the board when they leave office. They were never personal property. They were always tied to the function. But if a trustee exchanged property for their TCUs, that's different. Those units stay with the individual as an exchanger, documented on a separate certificate. The trust honors that transaction. That level of specificity, who holds what, under what condition, where it flows when circumstances change, is what separates a private express trust that endures from one that ends up in litigation. Now here's what I want you to do right now. Subscribe to this channel. This series builds sequentially, and you don't want gaps in your foundation. Watch the full video from the beginning if you came in partway or been jumping around. The TCU and UBI structure only clicks completely when you've seen the full context. Join the school community waitlist. The link is below. When doors open, that's where you get direct access to in-depth trust education and a community of people building and operating Express Trust seriously. Download the free What is a Trust ebook linked in the description. If you're sharing what you're learning with a spouse or family member who's early in this journey, that ebook is the cleanest path to start them off. And get the Trust Book GPS. Everything we're covering on this channel turned into a sequential action path. Use it. Now you came into this episode knowing a trust has structure. You're leaving it knowing the structure has structure. TCUs defines the economic participation layer across generations. UBIs identify who the trust serves. Together documented precisely in a well-drafted indenture with a clear flow table, they carry the grantor's intent forward without a court having to interpret it. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between a trust that holds and one that doesn't. The next episode is a board of trustees, how it's structured, how it functions, and why getting this right determines whether your trust operates the way you intended it or drifts into conflict. I'll see y'all there. Peace.